Good morning, everybody. It's Bonnie Hunter in the Quiltville studio, and I have been trying to figure out how to do this video. I've had lots of requests on how to make sure your seam allowance comes out right. And so this is my first time with a chest-mounted camera trying to share this little video. This is what started it all. So many of you have asked about what is that seam guide that is on your machine. Here's what I know for me, that any 1/4-inch foot, one without a guide or one with a guide, doesn't always work for me because based on where my chair is, my seating perspective, that can change what my eyes see, and I can easily overshoot my 1/4-inch seam. Now, what matters to me is unit size. And what happens to create unit size is a multitude of things. So we have the thickness of the fabric, right? And then you have how you cut the fabric. And we all cut the fabric just a little bit differently. For me, I need the line that I am cutting by. In this case, it was a 2-inch square. So it would be this line over here. I need that line. No, it's this line. On top of the fabric before I cut. Not next to the fabric on the mat before I cut, because you'll be one line width too short if your line is next to the fabric. I hope that makes sense. So you have how you cut your fabric, the thickness of your fabric, and then you have the thickness of your thread, right? Okay. And you have to remember that the fold, when you press to one side, for those that press to one side, if you're pressing to one side, you have the height of that seam, right? And the fact that the fold comes off of the left side of the thread. So your fold doesn't happen in the seam allowance. It happens before you even get to the thread is where that fold is. And that's why we hear so much about scant 1/4-inch seams. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is no such thing as the perfect scant, because again, the way you cut your fabric, the thickness of your thread, the thickness of your fabric, and where you place that seam is going to differ from person to person, right? So what matters to me is unit size. First things first, this little guy was a gift card from Target. I save all of these hotel room keys. Here's one from Bali several years back. I haven't cut into it yet because, you know, Bali. Okay, so I took this guy here. This was a hotel room key, and I scored it at 3/4 of an inch, and I can just snap that right on off. Okay, this is going to give me a nice solid edge that is not going to wear down the way that masking tape does. And then what I use is the Scotch double-sided poster tape. It's surface safe, so it's not going to hurt your machine. And I put a length of that double stick tape on the back of my hotel room gift card seam guide. And then I use this little tool. These are found in my store, on my website. It has holes for 1/4-inch, 3/8, 1/2-inch, 5/8, all the way up to 3/4. And I will put my needle down, trying to keep the chest camera where you can see what I'm doing here. I'll put my needle in that 1/4-inch hole, put my presser foot down, and then get my seam guide with the double stick tape on it right up to the seam guide. And then I'll remove the seam guide. And then there's one more thing you need to do. You need to sew a test seam. Because remember, the presser foot and the seam guide do not know how you cut your fabric, the thickness of your thread, or what your unit size is going to be. So I run a test seam, and I press it to one side. And here's where the proof is in the measuring, okay? So you're going to put your ruler on top of that unit, and it should reach 3.5 inches on the ruler for things to be the right size. So if this is too small after my test seam, what am I going to do? I'm going to repeat the process. I'm going to scoot this a little bit closer to my presser foot. Now, what if you don't have a machine that has a down low bobbin? What if you have a machine that has a drop front bobbin with a clear plastic cover? You can't cover up your feed dogs with a seam guide, That's for sure and for certain. So if you have a drop front bobbin, like on a Janome, a Brother, a Juki, or whatever ones that have the drop front. This is a Juki, it does not. I would cut the seam guide to just fit the top of my plastic bobbin cover. That way you can change the bobbin without having to pull up the whole seam guide and then have to go through the process of sticking it down again. So if you have a drop front bobbin, your guide will be smaller and cover just the top of that plastic cover so that you can pop that up and put it back down and nothing will change, right? It's going to be in front of your feed dogs. No matter where I sit, this is my seam guide. This is my edge that I shoot for. No matter where my chair moves, I always have an edge that stops me from overshooting my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I hope this helps somebody. Gift cards, hotel room keys, wherever you have those travel memories. A package of Scotch double stick poster tape. It's surface safe. And however you measure where your 1/4 inch is, stick that down there and then run a test seam so that you know that that seam is bringing you to unit size. It's the unit size you need to concentrate on, the unfinished size and the finished size. And don't measure just your seam allowance alone, because measuring the seam allowance by itself is not going to tell you anything. You have to sew the seam, press it over or open, and then measure your unit to make sure that it's coming out the right size. So that's my little hint for you today. Thank you for dealing with my little crazy little chest-mounted camera. Yeah, it's a weird gadget, and I'm going to have to learn how to use it better, but I think it may come in handy. Give it a try. Hotel room key, gift card, double stick tape. Measure your seam allowance. Put that down where it needs to be, and it'll help you keep consistency in your seams. Have a great day, everybody.